All right, everybody, we're going to get started. It's the top of the hour. Welcome to our SugarCRM user group, the first of 2021. We've got a fresh year. Last night we had a fresh coat of snow in Chicago, the sun's shining. It's a good day. So, with all that freshness, we got a fresh topic to talk about today, and that is the advanced configurations you can use with Sugar Studio. Really cool functions that developers and admins can use to really make your sugar what you want it to be. So let me do some introductions before we get started. My name is Deneen Madura. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Technology Advisors. And our two experts with us today are Megan Sheehan, our Trainer and Business Analyst, and Justin Kuhlthau, our Director of Services. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Megan to take us away.
All right, thank you, Deneen. So as Deneen said, we're going to be talking about some advanced configuration capabilities using Studio today. We'll do just a really quick review or overview of Studio first, but we're going to focus in today on how you can use formulas with Studio. So we're going to look at the formula builder and talk about calculated fields, dependent fields, and conditionally required fields. We also want to talk about just some new settings and maybe some functions that are lesser used that you might not be aware of. So we'll hit a few other things after we go through all of the formula-based things as well. So just a quick reminder, especially for those of you who maybe are, sort of new to being sugar administrators, Studio is the administrator tool that lets you easily configure modules. That would include both standard modules as well as any custom modules that you've deployed. And there are 6 main areas within Studio where you can make changes. The label section lets you modify the labels, the text for fields, for headers, for buttons. It's also where you can modify labels if you have multiple languages that you're supporting users in, so you can set up the labels in any language. The field section is where we'll mostly be spending our time today, where you can add and modify fields. There's also the capability under relationships to add and modify the relationships between modules, so the way that data is linked from one module to another. And then there's 3 different layout areas within Studio. There's the main layouts, which is your main web application page layouts. There's the subpanel layouts, which is the subpanel columns, the subpanel layouts that are used in the web application. And then there's your mobile layouts that are used for your mobile app. Studio is an administrator tool, so it's only available for users who are system admins or users who have a developer role permission for one or more modules.
One of the things we're going to focus on today is using formulas in Studio. Formulas are similar to what you would think of when you're doing any formulas within Excel. They're pretty simple to do, but can get quite complicated. We're going to show some examples of each of these today. You can see Sugar comes with a formula builder built within Studio. It's got a couple of buttons I wanted to point out. In the upper left corner, you have related fields. So that would be if you're on an account, or let's say you're on a contact, and you want to look at some field on the parent account, you could traverse that relationship by going to the related fields button and grab information from the account. Rollup is somewhat similar, except for that you can do summations from child records. So, for example, if you're on an account and you want to see the sum of all opportunities related to that account, you would click the roll up button. You could also do the sum of all opportunities that are closed won that are related to the account. Then down below, you have a lower left, you have functions where you can actually see all of the functions that Sugar Logic allows. Here I've typed in the filter EQ so you can see equals. And if you hover over the equal in the functions, it'll actually give you a little help text about it. And then on the right, you have fields where you can see all of the fields that are available on the module you're currently looking at within the studio. And then, of course, you can filter there for new fields. So these can be used in a number of different places. The first place we're going to cover is calculated fields. I talked just mention briefly what these would be. Things like you're maybe pulling information down from a parent account to show it at the contact level, as well as, or summing up information from child opportunities, for example. The field would then be read only because it's calculated. Obviously, Sugar is setting it. You do have to keep in mind that if I have a formula on my account that is updated based on opportunities, maybe the sum of all related opportunities, anytime I edit an opportunity, it's going to update the parent account. And vice versa, for example, if you have cases and you're pulling information down from the parent account, perhaps the account status, so you can see at the case level whether or not they are supported or not. Every time you edit the account, it's going to update all of the related cases. You can run into issues there if you have 500, 1,000 cases for one account. Every time you want to save that account, you have to also save 500 to 1,000. Or yeah, every time you want to save that account, you have to save the related 5,000 to 500 to 1,000 cases, and that can take a few seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds to save, which is not a good user experience. So you want to be careful when using calculated fields and think of those types of things. Also, calculated fields, as I've mentioned, kind of update every time the record's saved. So it's not really good for when this happens, do that. You'd want to use workflows for that. We could also use formulas for dependent fields. So the field will be hidden until a certain condition is met. And then there's also now conditionally required fields. So the field is not required until a certain condition is met. And if we're using that along with dependent fields, you'd want to make sure your required formula is more restrictive or equally restrictive as the dependent field, because you wouldn't want a field that's required but hidden. Sugar, I think, handles that well, but it's still not something you'd want to try out.
All right, so we're going to walk through examples of all three of those different ways you can use calculations through Studio, starting with the first one, which is calculated fields. And I've got a pretty long list of examples I'm going to run through with you here, going fairly well from simple to more complicated. And so this is going to give you a pretty good variety of ideas of how you might be able to use some calculated fields. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up Sugar. And I'm already in Studio. So you can see, whoops, too many screens. You can see, Studio with all my different modules in here. I'm going to start off with a few examples in the Opportunities module. So we'll go into Opportunities and go into our fields. And the first example I'm going to do is sort of a silly one that actually doesn't make any sense, but it's the simplest thing I could think of. So I wanted to start with something super easy. Like anything else, when you're doing your calculated fields, you want to make sure you think about your field type first. So what type of result you're going to have. And the first one I'm going to do is a really simple sum that, like I said, makes no sense. I'm just going to have Sugar add up the likely field and the best case field. Just again, I want something super easy as a starting point. So in order to turn our field into a calculated field, we're going to check the box here to turn it on. And then we're going to open the formula builder with the edit formula button. You can see now that I have it open, like Justin said, as you hover over a function, it's going to give you some tips about how to use that function, which can be really helpful. It will also tell you over here to the right with this little symbol what type of result it has. You can see all these numbers are things that have numeric results. These are things that have true false results. There's some date results and so on. So you have a variety of different types of functions you can use. One other important thing to know when you're working with the formula builder is you are going to be using the backend field names. So sometimes the field names versus the labels of what you call them are not the same. You might have changed what a field is called. So before you actually start building a formula, it's really important to do some pre-work of making sure you know what everything is called. In this case, if I want to add the likely field and the best case field, I need to know that the likely field is actually called the amount field. The best field is actually called the best case field, because those are how I'm going to see them in the formula builder, not the labels that may have been changed. And the same would be true for any drop-down items that you're going to be using. You'll need to know the drop-down item names, not the labels. So like I said, we're going to start with something super easy. We just want to add two things together. I can look through my list of functions here, or I can search if I know what it's called. And it looks like that function is called the add function. We can see in the example here that we can put as many different numbers into that function as we want. So if we wanted to add 3 things, we would just, add all 3 things. In this case, we're going to just add 2. I can click on this and it will add it into my formula here, or I can just type it if I know what the function is called. And then same thing with the fields. If I know what the field is called, I could start typing it, or I can find it over here and click on it and it will go ahead and add it. So that you can see a little bit of both, I'll go ahead and start typing. Best case, it does do searching and kind of type ahead so I can find what I'm looking for that way as well. The field names are always going to have the dollar symbol in front of them. That's Sugar's syntax for marking that as a variable, as a field name. And as Justin said, the syntax here, pretty similar to a lot of the Excel functions. You're going to have your function and your arguments inside in a parentheses. And again, you can see the examples here of how to use them. So like I said, that one's super easy. We're just going to add those 2 numbers together. We'll go ahead and save that field. The next one we're going to do is going to be something a little bit perhaps more practical, as well as a little tiny bit more complicated, which is a weighted opportunity amount. So I want to take my opportunity probability and multiply it times my opportunity amount to get a weighted value for that. My opportunity probability is stored as an integer. So also I just realized I clearly didn't walk through this one example first, because that's actually at the revenue line items level in this particular demo environment. So we're going to jump really quick there. I want to take my probability, which is an integer, and I want to divide that by 100 to turn it into a decimal, and then multiply it times my amount. So this is going to have me working with a couple of different fields and a couple of different functions. And before I get too far, I better make sure this is actually a currency field. Can you guys hear me okay? I just started getting some weird feedback through my headset.
No
I can hear
problem
you
on my
fine.
end. If anybody listening is having any issues with that, just chat it over to us and let us know.
Sorry, not sure if you are hearing me or not, because that sounded terrible to me when Deneen talks. So I'm going to try changing my settings really quick. Okay, Deneen, can you say something again?
Hello.
Yes, that's much better. Okay, that's what I had. Thank you.
Okay.
Something I ran into once before, so I had a feeling that might be what was happening, but some issue with my headset. All right, so what I was going to do before I got interrupted by terrible noises in my head was a weighted opportunity amount. So we need to take the amount of we take our probability and divide it by 100. So we're going to look for a function for dividing. Here we go. And we want to take our probability and divide it by 100. I can just type in my number, my 100. And then I want to take that and I want to drop it into my multiply function. So I'm actually going to put my multiply function first, because I want to take the result of this and use it as one of the things that I want to multiply together. So I'll go ahead and just type it in here. If I click it, it's going to add it at the end. Oops, I clicked the wrong one anyways. But if I click it, it added at the end. So I can either copy and paste it to the front or just type it in the front. All right, so I'm going to take my answer from dividing my probability by 100, and then I want to multiply that times my amount, which is actually called amount here. It is called likely case. See why knowing those field names becomes really important. So again, what we're doing here is embedding one function inside of another. We're getting the answer from this function, dividing our probability by 100, and then using that to multiply it with the likely case. So you can see how we've got to sort of stack our functions inside of each other here to get to the result that we want. All right, well, that's saving. Let's go check and see what our next example is going to be. So the next thing I wanted to show you was how you can convert data types from one to another, mostly because we're going to use this a little bit later on within another example. So let's say we have data that we want to use somewhere else, but it's a different type of information. In this case, we're going to do a drop down versus a text field. So we've got a drop down field. For whatever reason, we want to store that result in a text field or use it somewhere as text. We do have to convert it first to a string, which is a text value, in order to use that as a text value. And there's one sort of extra step we're going to do here because we're working with a drop down. So let me go check really quick. Our sales stage field is using the sales stage DOM drop down. Okay. So we're going to copy the stage into a new field. It's going to be a calculation. And in a lot of cases, if I want to convert something, there's a function for that. So if I type in 2 here, you can see there's a toString function that will take a value and turn it into a string, into a text. So in the example they're using here, they're taking a number and they're converting it into a string to use it as text. You can do the same thing with a date value. If you want to use the date into a text field, you could use the toString function for that. The added complexity for dropdowns is, again, going back to the fact that dropdowns have an name and a value, a label. So they have their actual value, their actual item name, and then they have the label that users see on the front end. If we do toString with our dropdown value, dropdown field, it's not going to cause an error. The formula is going to work. It's going to correctly convert this value to the string, but the value it's converting is that backend database value, not the front end string or the front end label that users are used to seeing. So in some cases, we really want that label. We want that value instead. There is a function for that called get dropdown value. And so this lets us pass in the name of the dropdown that we want to use, and then the actual backend value, in this case, our field value, and get the label instead of the backend value. And so we can put that in here. The name of our dropdown we just looked up was sales stage DOM. And then we want to pass in the field. So what we're saying here is take this field value, get its label using this dropdown list, and then convert that to a string. And actually, now that I look at this, I probably wouldn't actually need to convert this to a string because this one is in fact returning a string value. So the toString function here is not necessary because it's already returning a string. I do want to point out before I forget that when I'm typing in a text value where my argument is or my function is expecting text, I do need to put quotes around that value so Sugar knows to treat this as a text value. All right, and we're going to use that concept in our next example, and we'll use revenue line items again since we're already working there, but we're going to concatenate, which means put multiple text values together, several fields, in order to give a standard name to our opportunity, or in this case, our revenue line item. So rather than having the users type in a name for the revenue line item, we're going to have it pull in the values from a couple of different fields and use that as the name instead. And actually, I am going to switch back to opportunities for this because of one of the arguments I want to use just to show you something. So I'm going to jump back. So in this case, instead of creating a new field, I want to edit my opportunity name field, and I'm going to make it a calculated field. And I'm going to look for that concatenate function, which is called concat. You can see it takes 2 or more pieces of text and puts them together. Really important to see in the example, what they've done here is they have included a space as one of their arguments. If you don't put spaces between your arguments, it's going to just run them all together with no spacing. So that is something we'll want to think about as we build out our example here. And what I want to do is I want to have all my opportunities named using the name of the related account and then the expected close date for that opportunity. So I can just quickly see at a glance, who's the opportunity with and when is it for. In order to use the account name, I'm going to use that related field function that Justin pointed out. So I want to pull in the name of the account and use that as part of my formula. You could technically type this all out yourself using the related function, but it's a lot easier to use the little wizard that they've built in to make that easier for you. All right, so I'm going to start with that. Then I'm going to put a space in, maybe a space and a dash. And the other thing I wanted to put in here was my expected close date, which is this date closed field. Now that is not a text value, but this field is appending text together. So if I just go ahead and use my date closed field, it's going to give me an error because I'm not using a string, a text value, for my second or my third argument here, my date closed. So I need to use that toString function to first convert the date into a text value, a string, and then I can use it in my concatenate function. Now I could put more things into that function. I don't have to just have two things there. If I wanted to put in the amount or any of the other fields from my opportunity screen, I could certainly pull those in there. All right, the next one we're going to do is at the account level. So we're going to use that roll up function that Justin had pointed out, and we'll do a couple of examples there. First, we're going to do a count of the number of opportunities that the account has, and then we'll do a sum of how many dollars the one opportunities have for that account. So let me jump over to the accounts module. We'll go ahead and add a new field. The first one is going to be a count, so that's going to be an integer result. Opportunity count. And we'll make that calculated. And so again, we could do this just building it ourselves, but they've added this little wizard in here to make it easier. We can say we want actually, it turns out they haven't for count. They've done it for the sum, the complicated one. So let's just really quickly insert one in here without worrying about the details, because I want to show you this piece. That's the piece that I always want to check the wizard for, which is how is that relationship named? Different formula types kind of refer to that slightly differently, and sometimes they're plural and sometimes they're singular, and I don't want to have to remember that. So even if I'm not doing a function that's in the wizard, I will start there and just get that example to look at of how it's named, and then I can come down here and I can find my count function, and I can see all I need to do is put in that link to see what it wants to count. So I need to count the opportunities, and I can go ahead and pull this example out now that I don't need it anymore for my function. So what this is going to do is it's going to look at how many opportunities each account has connected to it and just give me that number. Now that's going to count every single opportunity, whether it's won or lost or open. If I wanted to just count some of them, I'd have to do a conditional count, which the next example we're going to do is going to be a conditional sum instead of a conditional count, but the functions are there for both. So in order to show you both the sum functions and the conditional functions, I'm going to put that together into this function here, which is going to do a conditional sum. Again, if I was starting this without having just done this a minute ago, I would start with the rollup function. Even though conditional sum isn't an option here, I would say, give me an example to look at as a starting point. I know what I want to do is add up that likely field for the opportunities. So again, I can kind of see as a starting point what that looks like. Then I can go into my functions and I can see there's actually conditional versions of the count and the sum and the minimum date functions. So I can use that instead. I can see this is going to start off the same way with that link and then the field that I want to sum up. But then I'm going to have two additional things, which is to tell it which field to look at to see whether or not to include this particular opportunity in my sum, and then what values I want to have in a list of values for when it should include them in the sum. So again, we're going to start the same way. So we'll just copy that over and then get rid of my example. And I only want to include opportunities where they are won. So that's going to be the sales status field. in my opportunities module. I missed a quote there, so we're going to put that quote in there. And then I need to give it a list of options. When I'm giving it a list, I have to tell it it's getting a list by telling it to create a list. Even if I'm only giving one value, it needs to be able to treat it as a list. And then I need to put in the value that I want to look for, which is closed one. If I had multiple values, like I wanted to include the lost values, I could include that as well in my list, but I don't want to do that. I just want this one. So again, what this is going to do is say, find all of the opportunities where the sales status is closed one, and then add up the amounts of all of those opportunities for each account. All right, I've got a couple more examples. Hang in there, I'm getting there. I did want to give you a wide variety of examples here. So the next thing I want to do is something that I use pretty often, which is if-else logic. So this is what you would use if you want different things to happen in different situations. Anytime you have sort of a, well, in some cases I want you to do this, but in other cases I want you to do that, that's where an if-else function would come into play. So what I'm going to do with my if-else function is, let's say I wanted to take my different case statuses. This is actually a real example that Justin had recently. And they wanted to take their case statuses and kind of generalize them into just an open versus closed value for whatever reason, show in the portal or to put in an email template or something like that. So in this case, I need to check to see what the actual status of my case is. And actually, let's go take a quick look at those status values. So if it's new or assigned or pending input, I want to call it open. And if it's closed or rejected or duplicate, I want to call it closed. So with the if-else function, the first thing I'm going to have is a true or false statement, a Boolean statement, where it's going to find out if that thing is true or not. So that's going to be like, what's my if condition? Then I'm going to have an argument for what to do if it's true and what to do if it's false. So if the first statement comes true, it'll do the first thing that follows that, the kind of the second argument. And if not, it will do the third thing. So in this case, I want to check a few different things. So I'm going to use the OR function. If any of the things inside my OR function are true, it counts as true. And so I want to check if the status is equal to new, or if it's equal to, what was it, assigned, or if it's equal to pending input. And if any of those three things are true, I want the answer to be open. And otherwise, I want the answer to be closed. Now, this function is starting to look pretty complicated. It can be a little bit hard to kind of tell where the parentheses go together, where they don't. First of all, if it's helpful, you can put extra spaces in here. It's not going to mess up the formula builder. So sometimes, especially with if-else statements, I'll sort of split it out on multiple lines so I can see this is my if condition. This is what to do if it's true. This is what to do if it's false. The other thing that I'll do sometimes is just copy this over into an editor like Notepad++, which you can get for free if you don't have that on your computer already. And this will highlight the parentheses for me. So I can see where my different parentheses are opening and closing. And I can make sure that I've got everything where I want it to be. So I've got these three different equal statements kind of all embedded inside of my OR function correctly. And then my what to do if true and what to do if false. All right, I had a feeling I was going to get that error. I was thinking this was already, let's call this case status instead. All right, I've got one last complicated example and then one simpler example. And then I have to let Justin talk for a while. Sorry, Justin, I kind of took over. So the last example I want to do is to do a difference between two dates. In this case, I'm going to do the difference between when the case was created and when it was resolved. Now, this particular example is actually not necessary because Sugar has a standard field for this in SugarCRM for calculating that, but it's a frequent enough ask that I wanted to show you how you can do it because it's a little bit of a funky way to do it. So Sugar has a function for doing the, let's see if I can remember what it's called. Oh, you just subtract actually. It doesn't have a function for doing like difference between 2 days. It doesn't have a subtract function for subtracting two numbers, but it doesn't have a, date difference or date subtract function. And so what you need to use instead is this DaysUntil function. And so what we're going to do is basically use the fact that we can figure out the difference between how many days it is until the date opened and how many days it is until the date closed, and compare those two numbers to figure out the difference between them. And I always have to stop and think about like which one's further, which one comes first. So in this case, we want to take the resolved date, how many days it's been since the case was resolved, and then compare that to the number of days it was opened. Did I do that right? It was open longer ago, so it's been more days since then. Yes. Okay. So we're going to use the DaysUntil function and the subtract function. Let's start with subtracting. And we can do the days until the resolved date minus the days until the open date. That's one of those things that I'll stop and think about it, but also I'll just go try it. And if I get a negative number, then I know I did them in the wrong order. I come back and fix it. And we can go ahead and save that. Actually, before I save that, I do want to point out something. This resolved date time isn't filled in until the case is resolved. And so up until that point, this formula isn't going to work correctly because it doesn't have a date in this date field. It's an empty field. Now, it won't show the user any errors. The user won't notice anything's wrong, but it will log an error in the Sugar log on the back end. And sometimes, it can be a little frustrating to see those errors or again, it is an error. You don't necessarily want errors. What you could do is put this inside of an if-else statement to check to see if this field is filled in. And so that would be sort of a better way to do that. I already did that. So if it will let me, it won't let me copy. Never mind. I was going to just copy and paste it over to save a few minutes, but we can do it. What we want to do is check if this field is filled in. The way that I normally do that, and Justin may have a better way, but I don't know it if there is to check to see if it has, is I use the string length function to see if there's a value there, if it's greater than 0. But this isn't a string, it's a date, so I have to convert it to a string. So I'm going to use 3 different functions here. I'm going to use toString and convert my resolved date into a string. Let me just type it because otherwise it's going to put it at the end again. Come on. I'll type the whole thing. Then I'm going to put that inside of the string length function, strlen, to convert it to to get the string length of it. And then I'm going to put that inside of the greater than function to see if that result is greater than 0. And all of that is just a fancy, complicated way of checking to see if that field's filled in. And if it is, we want to use our formula. And if not, we want to just leave this field blank. That's another one that I would have copied and pasted over to Notepad before saving to make sure I had the parentheses in the right place. All right, and then one last super simple example, although it's not a good idea for the reasons Justin just talked about. If you want to copy a value from one field to another, or from one record to another, you can just drop in a field here. So first of all, I could just copy whatever field, something that's text, into a field, just copying it straightforward probably not something you'd use very often. But if I want to copy in a related field, I would just use that related field function to pull in the account field that I wanted and drop it in here. And as Justin mentioned, this is going to mean that every time the account gets updated, all of the related cases get updated. And oftentimes an account might have a lot of cases. So this is really not a great way to resolve that particular need, because you're going to end up causing issues with case or account saves. One last thing really quick. Sorry, Justin, I'm going to take one more minute. When you create calculated fields and you put them on your layout, see if I have 2 of them in there. Okay. These fields don't have any values in them yet. Even though they're calculations, the calculations are calculated when the record is saved. And so if I were to go to a case, right now those fields are going to be empty on every single case. So here we can go into this case, and I can see that neither of those fields have any value. If I edit and save the case, those fields should get filled in. And so really important to recognize that when you create new calculated fields, those calculations don't automatically get applied to your existing records. If you want them to apply to existing records, you need to edit and save them, which you can do either one by one like that, or you can do a recalculate values, which is a mass update just to edit those records and make those calculated fields edit and save. And with that, phew, I finally get a break, and Justin is going to take you through some more examples.
Thank you, Megan. That was all very good information. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. I'm going to be talking about the other 2 types of SugarLogic fields, properties dependent field examples and conditionally required field examples. As I mentioned earlier when I was mentioning them, these are often used together. For example, if you have a dependent field that pops up under certain conditions, you may also want that field required under certain conditions. So we're going to take a look at that, and then even look at some issues you can run into when you're doing these things. So the first example I'd like to show is a dependent field checking a box prompts for a note. So let's go ahead and bring Sugar over here. Here we're looking at an opportunity in my demo instance, and there's a checkbox called Send to PM. Now, that would be Send to Project Manager, and then you could have Note to Project Manager here. This field is not required, but it could be. I'm going to go ahead and type in a note here. This needs to be reviewed and save that. So, I mean, what was the point of that? Well, you can use these types of fields to say when this box is checked or when the Note to PM field is filled in. Use Sugar BPMs to send an alert. And you could even send that note then on to the person saying, take a look at this opportunity. Here's the name of the opportunity, the account name, how much it's worth, and this is the note, what you should be interested in. Looking at this on the back end, we can see here in the studio, I have my opportunity fields, a simple checkbox. There's nothing I did special for the checkbox because it doesn't have any sort of calculation. But when we look at the Note to PM box, we notice that I've checked dependent, and it's visible if Send to PM is true. I'm going to go ahead and edit that, and I can see here, if I type in my filter, that Send to PM is a true-false. It's a checkbox. So I don't actually need to set up a formula, whereas if it was a text box or a drop down, I would need to set up some sort of formula to say when it's equal to this, show. And we'll see that in a second. The next dependent field example I want to show is picking other from a drop down prompts for a note. So let's jump back here and jump to our account XYZ Funding Incorporated. Here I have an account status field. And if I were to click in danger, suddenly I get a whole new line that pops up, and it says, what is the reason for being in danger? They are not returning my phone calls. So again, this could be useful if you're tracking changes to the reason in danger field. It can be useful if you want to use BPMs. This is one that I did make required. And this one's going to be slightly more complicated formula, as we will see in a second. So let's jump up to our account fields. And we'll find our reason in danger field. You'll notice I have the dependent field checkbox checked. I also have the required field checkbox checked. We're going to start with dependent fields here, edit this formula. And here I am using that equals formula. So we have if the account status is equal to in danger, then I know that I want to make that field visible. And one thing to keep in mind is this is not the display value. This is the database value of the dropdown you're looking to look at. So if you have a dropdown that has maybe some strange database values, you may need to take that into account. For example, I can come into my account status field, edit here, and I see what the database values are in bold. Sometimes for whatever reason, maybe it's an integration, these may have IDs behind them. For example, the ID of 4 may be former customer. And then in your formulas, you would need to use 4. The last type of dependent field example I wanted to show is closing an opportunity prompts for a closed one/lost reason. And this one's a little goofy just because of the way I set it up. And I wanted to show it this way. So let's go ahead and find our opportunity here. Jumping back to our opportunity, trackercorn.com, you can see our status is in progress, but I can't edit the status field because we are using revenue line items. And the status will update based on changes to the sales stage down here. So for example, if I edit this revenue line item to be closed 1 and save this, my status up here changes to be closed 1. At least it should have. Looks like I needed to refresh before I did that. Let's go ahead and save this again. There we go, closed 1. Now, reason closed is a required field, but I don't actually have to fill it out because I wasn't editing the opportunity at the same time. So you need to keep in mind how things work, make sure you're testing it out, and maybe do things a slightly different way. So if now, for example, I click edit here and try to save, it won't let me save because reason closed is a required field. So now I can say they liked our price. I suppose in this case you could always have a workflow or BPM that says if the status becomes closed won or closed lost and the reason closed is empty, send an alert to the account manager telling them they need to fill in the reason closed. So let's take a look at that one in the studio, and this one's slightly more complicated. If we come over here to find reason closed, again, we have dependent checked and required checked, but for now we'll stick with dependent visible if. I can click edit formula here. Here I did something slightly different. I said is in list. This will tell me it returns true if the item is contained within the list. So I have my field sales status, but then I can't just give a comma separated list of values. I actually have to create a list for it to look in. So I just went ahead and created a list. This is how I prefer to do formulas, sugar logic, based on drop-down values.
This is a different way versus what I did in my if else formula before with the case statuses, where I used or and several equals functions. This is perhaps a little bit cleaner of a way to do it than the way I chose to.
Okay, so let's jump back over here. And since these two were closely related, I combined them into one slide. We have conditionally required field examples here. The account status becomes in danger, require notes about the account status. Opportunity closed, require the reason one lost note. And here I mentioned again that if you have a dependent field, it's not always visible. You don't want it required and hidden. Again, Sugar will handle it, but it's just good practice to make sure you're making them equally restrictive. And to do that, it's as simple as copying and pasting the formula from one to the other. Although certainly if I wanted to, I could delete that and save. Well, you're supposed to be able to. Suppose I could just write true, I think. And this will always be required now. So if I were to come into a different type of field and just check required and save, that field is always required. Then opportunity type is now always a required value because the formula is blank. So as we reload the page to let it refresh our requirements, we can edit this, and our reason closed is still required. Although if I were to go ahead and reopen this, then our reason closed disappears, and we can edit and save without issue. Okay, Megan, you need to screen share some more?
In the interest of time, I might not at this point. So I guess you can just keep going off your screen.
Okay.
All right, so a few other things that we wanted to walk through now that we've kind of gone through everything related to calculations. First of all, if you haven't taken a look recently at the types of fields, it's always good to kind of know what your options are. Some of the frequently used options are obviously your text fields, your drop downs, your multi-selects, dates versus date times. Do you want just a date or do you want a date and a time? You've got some numeric options like integers, decimals, floats, and currencies. So really important to just kind of be paying attention when you're creating fields to what type of data you're going to store in them. Numeric fields in particular, it's really important that if you want to be able to do summaries of your numeric data later in reports or in calculated fields, they have to be set up as a numeric field type. So you can't set up a text field and then go to your report and say, add up all the values in this field, because Sugar has not checked to make sure that it only has numbers in it. There is a new field type that was introduced in the 10.2 release in the fall. So that is an auto increment field. If you use the cases module in Sugar, you're probably familiar with the case number field where it auto assigns a number as every case is created. You can now add auto increment fields to any module that you want them in. You could have multiple auto increment fields in a single module if you wanted. They are numeric only, so they can't be like a combination of text and then a number. They're just numeric fields. But you can set a starting value. So if you want them to always start, the lowest one should be 1000 or whatever number you want, you can set that. And when you create a new auto increment field, it will automatically assign values to existing records. It's going to do them alphabetically by the Sugar ID for some reason, but it will auto assign existing records to have a value. So once you create an auto increment field, every record will automatically have a number in that field. Some other settings that are available when you're working with fields in Studio. First of all, a lot of field types will let you adjust the global search settings. So global search, the search at the top of your screen, is controlled through, in part, the field level global search settings. This lets you choose whether or not that particular field is included in the searching when someone does a global search. And if you turn global searching on for a field, it's going to then ask you for a boost set value, which is what it uses to rank the matches in terms of importance. So for example, let's say you have an account named 123 manufacturing, and you have a phone number that has a 123 in it. When someone searches 123, which of those do you want to come up higher in their search results? The account name 123 manufacturing or the phone number with 123 in it? Your boost values are how you can tell Sugar which one you think is more important and which one should come first. The default settings for that for the fields that are searched by default range from 0 to 2. So, if you're looking for something to be very important, you might give it like a 1.9 setting or a 1.7 setting. For something that's not very important, you might give it a 0.5 setting. Just to kind of keep it in line with the existing fields. Things like account name and contact name are the ones that are in the 1.9 somethings by default. You can also select whether or not to audit fields. Auditing fields means it's going to log every change to those fields in the audit log in the activity stream. So you can see every time it changed, when it was changed, and by who. The activity stream in the audit log can fill up with a lot of data if you're auditing a lot of fields. So you do want to give some thought to whether or not it's actually important to audit that particular field. If you do have a lot of data in your activity stream, there's a scheduler that you can turn on as an administrator to automatically delete data older than a specified number of months. So you can kind of decide how many months of activity stream history you want to keep and then automatically delete stuff older than that. You can also set comment and help text through Studio fields. Comment text is only visible in Studio, so it's basically a place for multiple system administrators to talk about what a field is being used for or put notes in about a field. Help text is actually shown to the user. So sometimes you might see when you're working in Sugar, if you hover over a field or you're editing a field, it will pop up with some additional information. That's the help text. You can also modify the import and duplicate merge settings. These control whether or not that particular field is shown when you're importing data in the list of fields and whether it's shown when you're merging duplicates in the list of fields. So if you're not using a field, you can disable that so that you're not showing unnecessary fields on those screens. And then finally, another important field property is mass updating. Mass updating is available for certain types of fields and lets you include that field in the list of fields you can mass update when you're working in Sugar. All right, and a last couple of things here. First of all, there's a new layout that you can edit as of version 10.0. So this would be the spring release from last year. This controls which fields are displayed when you're previewing a record. So previously, you couldn't control which fields were displayed on that particular view. It was kind of just defaulted in. Now you can actually modify what's shown on the preview view. And then this is new. It's not actually Studio, but just a fun bonus fact. As of the 10.2 release, user preference settings are now available for subpanel lists as well as module lists. So the functions you have on your module list views, like resizing columns, reordering columns, and turning columns off and on, are now available on all of your subpanels as well as your list views.
On to recent releases. This past Friday, January 15th, Sugar released their Q1 2021 or 10.3 cloud-only release. Upgrades in the cloud have not started yet. They will start either this Friday or sometime next week. There's a really good post from Rich Green in the Sugar Club, Sugar's newer community, that has a lot of good information and some videos you can watch. Some of the nice stuff that jumped out at us with regards to new functionality are now relationship fields are available in Studio to mark for audit. So these are, for example, on a contact, the parent account field is now available for you to mark to audit. So you can see if someone moves a contact from one account to another, or similarly a case from one account to another. They do not yet let you check a box for required, which would be nice, but hopefully that'll come in the future. There's also a new studio option to make fields read only, either always or conditionally with a formula. So that'll go well with the user group we just had. Process definitions have a new start options for new records or first update. And there's another one for new records and all updates. In the past, we had to have two start conditions, one for new records and one for updates. Now they've combined those into one, making our lives a little easier. There are new meetings and calls filters to show records where the user is a guest, so meetings I'm attending, and scheduled calls I'm attending. Before it was only meetings I'm assigned to, kind of where I was the creator or I'm the host type of thing. Now you can see where you might be a guest. We now also have the ability to mass update more field types via the studio. Checkbox, decimal, encrypt, float, iframe, integer, phone, relate, URL, and text field. Those are all going to be very nice to be able to mass update now. They've added contracts module to the mobile client, so now you can view, edit, create contracts in mobile. And now notes can include multiple attachments. So you can upload a single note with, let's say, a PDF or 3 PDFs, maybe your contract, your customer support agreement, and an NDA can all be on one note now, making things a little easier to organize. Sugar also hosted their first, doesn't really have a name, Join Us in the Clubhouse for Q&A with Sugar Team this past Friday, January 15th, where customers could join and ask Sugar any question they wanted. It's my understanding there's another Q&A scheduled for Friday, February 12th, probably 2021, not 2020. And I would suggest you all go there if you want to ask them questions, whether it's product suggestions, how-do-Is, anything. And you can, it's always posted, or at least the most recent one was posted, the home page of that Sugar Club I just mentioned. So you can see, go there for more event information. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin and Megan. I will include some of those links that Justin noted in the follow-up email that I will send you, as well as this recording and any other assets that came out of this user group. So next user group, we do these every other month. The next one will be in, what month is it? It's January, March. So when it gets closer to the date, we'll be sending out some email notifications to let you know what that topic's going to be about and when that's going to be. In the meantime, we've got another minute or two here. If there's any questions anyone has in wrapping up, feel free to throw those out. Otherwise, we'll give you 2 minutes back in your day, and you can expect that follow-up email from me to come tomorrow. So keep an eye out. And if anybody has any issue or doesn't see that come into their inbox, just let me know and we'll make sure that you get that information. But we also keep it, all of our user groups are posted on our website, and they're also posted on YouTube as well. So thank you, Justin and Megan. This was an awesome user group. Thank you everybody who attended, and have a wonderful rest of your day.